presentation that we've been doing. We've had interaction so far, but Chuck and I feel pretty comfortable. If anybody has questions, just unmute and ask the question, and let's not talk over each other. So it's not too crazy. Chuck now goes by Charles Vinick. We all knew him as Chuck, so I have a hard time adjusting, so I'm going to keep calling him Chuck. He was a 3-year student at Andover, and I was interested in looking at especially his lower year. He lived in America House, and so the list of people that he lived with it was fabulous. Bob Harris, Taylor Monroe, Court Dixon, Ben Barker, Jim Chestnut, Steve Marshall, Terry Kahn, Graham Means, Greg Richards, Franz Schneider, and Walt Pearson. And my reaction was, what a group. What a group. And somehow, Chuck, I know you survived it. Upper year, he lived with Dave Gast in Taylor Hall. And then he lived in my dorm, Foxcroft, his senior year. Now, Chuck lives in Santa Barbara, California. You can see him in his whale shirt. That's very Santa Barbara-like. He lives with his wife, Susan. They have 2 kids. Both are married. Son, Matt, lives in Connecticut, and I'm told he's a sports TV producer. And their daughter, Marin, and her husband, and their daughter, Samantha. So Chuck now is a grandfather who's now age 16. That's Samantha. They live in Los Angeles. So Chuck has had a pretty good life so far. Now he is executive director of the Whale Sanctuary Project, and that's what we're going to be hearing about today. Prior to this, he lived he worked for 25 years with the Jacques Cousteau family. So I hope we can hear a little bit about that. And his presentation today is intended to share what this sanctuary concept is all about. And of course, to plant the seed that if any of you might have interest in getting involved, he would welcome exploring with you. So with that, I want to introduce Chuck and say again, thank you, Chuck, for putting together this presentation. I've seen the video. I don't know if everyone else has, but Chuck, I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Take it away.
Well, thanks, Eddie, and thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us. Obviously, this is the kind of presentation that I have done a bunch of times, so we shouldn't think about it as a presentation. It happens to have that format. It's got a bunch of slides, but really none of that matters. What we ought to do is talk about it. So I underscore what Eddie is saying, interrupt us, make comments, jeer when you want, or anything of that nature, just so we get to engage about it. It's a subject that obviously is dear to my heart, and I've been privileged to be part of. Who gets to spend their life running around the world on Calypso, doing things with the Cousteau family, messing around in films, and ending up with whales? It's unusual, and it's been tremendously fun. It is still fun. Some of the days are harder than others, like in any one of the jobs and any one of the activities you have all done. But at the end of the day, it's really been special, and it's still special to be able to do this kind of work. And so I'm still working full-time, sometimes more than full-time. And I don't ever expect to stop unless I have to. And that's what I think is a true blessing. It's a rare privilege. So let me share some slides. I'll share my screen. We'll run through it. I won't try to spend a lot of time on the slides. I would like to show the 5-minute film because it really grounds the whole story, and it's much quicker than anything I could say around the same set of subjects. So I'll do that as well. Any comments, questions, complaints, or anything before I jump into that? Doesn't look like it. I can't see everyone all at the same time, but okay, let me share my screen. We'll go to this. I'll go to full screen and you'll see that. So basically, the name of the project, Whale Sanctuary Project, nonprofit corporation incorporated in the US. We've also incorporated Whale Sanctuary Canada in Canada to have a sister company there. And you'll see the reason why momentarily. So what in the heck is this about? Basically, this really is about changing the way we relate to captive whales. There are sanctuaries for elephants, for big cats, for gorillas and the like, but there have never been sanctuaries for whales and dolphins. So this project was created in 2016, became active in 2017 to establish a permanent seaside sanctuary where basically we can retire orcas and belugas. There are many, some 3,000 whales and dolphins in captivity around the world. So basically, what's our mission? It's keep them in the ocean. So we're going from these kinds of small tanks to an image like this. So with that, I'd like to just take your indulgence for 5 minutes to show you this short film that's won a bunch of awards. It won Best Short Film for the Toronto Film Festival. It's been in about 12 festivals. I've had many experiences with orcas off the south coast of Iceland. And there you got to see them in their natural environment. You got to see them majestic in every way. They're wide-ranging predators, traveling 100 miles a day and diving as much as 300 feet to forage. And they live in tightly knit family groups, often not leaving their birth family the whole lives. And in many of these families, the moms call all the shots.
Talking about a level of emotional bonding that is beyond the par of what we experience as humans. Feelings and emotions come into play in orca and cetacean psychology in a very intense and very fundamental way. They have culture, they have dialects, they have interesting communication systems and a big brain. They're right up there with us. When you look at the orca brain through an MRI image, the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, the gray matter, is actually more convoluted than that of the human brain. For a brain like that, there is nothing to do in a concrete tank.
There are actually 3,000 whales and dolphins in captivity around the world. There are 57 orca, more than 300 beluga, and they live in very small tanks, often not any deeper than the whales are long.
A concrete tank is like an auditory hall of mirrors. At first, they're going to get back a lot of echoes, and eventually, they're going to realize there's nothing to echolocate on. And at that point, they simply shut down.
And in captivity, they live in artificial families. Mothers and calves are separated based solely on commercial interest. Captive whales rarely live more than 20 years. Fewer than 50% lived more than 4 years after capture. The captive industry makes the point that they're providing education about orcas to all of their audiences. I think it's anti-educational. It teaches kids that we as humans should dominate them, as opposed to anything about what they are as animals, what their culture is.
The reason China and other countries are capturing orcas and other cetaceans and putting them in concrete tanks is because of the success of marine parks in this country.
One could lose hope.
One could say there are more and more animals being captured, and the numbers we have today will be nothing compared to what will happen in the future. But we have to put our hope in children to stand up and say no, and will demand of their parents, no matter where they live on the planet, that we treat these animals with understanding and care and keep them in the wild. As the public ethic around keeping whales and dolphins in captivity changes, people are demanding that the shows stop and that the animals have an opportunity to live in more natural environments. Most of the animals today in captivity were born in captivity. So releasing them would be in many ways tragic because they do not have the skills to survive in the wild. The best solution is to build natural seaside sanctuaries where captive whales and dolphins can live in an environment as close to their natural habitat as we can provide. They'll have a sandy bottom with critters, fish, and crabs with whom to interact. They'll have birds on the surface to chase. And they will have space, more than 300 times more than the largest performance tank in captivity.
The captivity industry is looking at us. The public has the power to end this suffering.
Sanctuaries have been built for elephants, for gorillas, and big cats. And now is the time to create sanctuaries for whales and dolphins.
There is another way. Here it is.
It's 63. Carry the 6.
So this is the sanctuary that we're actually creating in Nova Scotia. And the reason we're really doing it is not about necessarily the whales that will be lucky enough to live here, but it's about creating a new relationship with cetaceans. So the key elements of a sanctuary are that it's not just a place to live, but it's a place where the animals can thrive, where the whales themselves are the highest priority. There's no priority around commercial activity, no priority around tourism or anything like that. There's no performances, no breeding of the animals, because we don't want to continue any kind of captivity, even that in a sanctuary. And there's certainly no unnecessary invasive research or procedures. We promote the natural life of the animals as much as possible, but we also have to recognize that it's still captivity of a form, and we have to care for them 24/7. So we do as much as we can to promote autonomy, but it's not back to the wild. And then also we're providing authentic education. We have a conservation ethic, and we'll share all of the data. Today, when a whale dies in a marine park, you can almost never find out why. So it's really important that the data around the health of the animals and all research around that is openly shared. And then, of course, the environment will be maintained as sustainably as possible, both for the whales' welfare and also certainly for the environment that we find the sanctuary in. And then one of the things that we've found, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment, is that you have to do this in a place, in a community where the people who live there embrace the idea of a sanctuary and they're choosing it to be there. So what we did starting in 2017 was scour, if you will, all the bays and inlets and everything else that we could find in Washington State, British Columbia, and Nova Scotia. Looked at about 130 sites, narrowed it down to somewhere between 30 and 40 that I visited, looking for all the physical characteristics that we needed to have meet our criteria for a sanctuary. And basically through that process, what we learned is that it didn't matter what sites myself and my team found. What mattered was finding the community, because we could look day and night. And if you, a couple of you, a number of you are in Maine. I've tried to see all the bays and inlets in Maine, and you can't get there because of private property and the roads. So you need the local community to tell you where to go. in the nicest way. Some of them will tell you where to go for other reasons, but you're really hoping they'll help you find a sanctuary site. So really, this process is what we ended up going through. We ended up doing town meetings all along the coast of Nova Scotia, throughout Washington State, up in BC, and asking the community that if they liked what we were talking about, tell us about the sites that we should look at. And that's what we did. And that led us to a little tiny area on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia, the town of Sherbrooke in Port Hilford Bay. There are some 7,000 kilometers along the Atlantic coast here of Nova Scotia, and I drove all of them a number of times looking at bays and the like. And this community is the one that really embraced us in a way that said, hey, come here. And this, it's a small town. This is basically everybody. And they all would come out to these town meetings, listen to what we had to talk about, ask their questions, challenge us, but at the end of the day, embrace the idea of having a sanctuary. So in February 2020, we announced that we were selecting the community of Port Hilford for the sanctuary site. That was on February 25th. On the 26th, they threw a party for us, and it was like a wedding. This was the cake that showed up
here
at their event. And there were signs on everyone's lawn, belugas belong here. They had roadside stands and the like. It's just astounding, the welcome that they provided. And of course, 3 days later, basically the world shut down with COVID. And that's been somewhat the challenge since, but we can talk more about that. The announcement got coverage all over the world. It was a stand-up ovation as well in the Canadian Parliament that day and the next day. So it's getting attention around the world for all good reasons. This gives you a sense of Port Hilford Bay, a little larger than 3 kilometers. This is the sanctuary site. Part of what makes it such an attractive site is it's well protected from the prevailing winds from the southwest, and it's got good depth, it's got good current flow and the like. So from a physical standpoint, it meets all of our criteria. This is a drone picture of the same area. So we'll be putting nets from what they call this an island. It's actually a little peninsula, Berishwa Island. We'll put a net out here, bring it all the way around to this rocky point, and we'll have all of this area as the sanctuary. So what we've been doing really over the last couple of years, among other things, is a tremendous amount of environmental research so that we can understand everything about the water space as well as the land. Most important part of that probably is the hydrodynamic model that we created earlier this year. And we're continuing that work now to understand how the water flows, because basically, I mean, like everyone else, whales poop. So the question we get a lot is, what happens to the whale poop? Well, you have to, luckily whales poop in primarily liquid. It does dissipate, but you've got to make sure that the environment is an environment that can be maintained sustainably. So understanding how the tides flow, the currents flow, how the depths are going to impact all of the movement of the whales and any of the material that could be in the water is critically important to deciding on the sanctuary site. So this is just an example of some of the stuff that we're doing. This is an artist rendering of the sanctuary, more than 100 acres. So as we said in the video, multi times larger than any captive whale has ever been in. Depths up to 18 meters, excellent current and tidal flow, and no pack ice. Gets a little surface ice, but no pack ice, which is important for year-round use. There a question? Couldn't hear you. Okay. One of the things that's really phenomenal about this site is this wharf exists, and it's been under a 50-year lease to the number of the lobster fishermen. They've chosen to give up their lease and give us exclusive access to the wharf. For lobster fishermen, those of you in Maine and elsewhere who know the lobster fishermen, that's unbelievable. I've had other communities in Nova Scotia where, unlike telling us where to go, they did tell us where to go. They threatened my life if I wanted to move into their lobster area. So it's unbelievable to get this kind of support. We'll have a full-time veterinarian husbandry, animal husbandry building, 24/7 security, marine operations, boats. We're putting in a little more than a mile of net. So we have to clean the nets all the time. You've got divers, a full marine operations team, as well as a net loft and a very large observation area so that we can see all of the animals all the time. Because if you've got a beluga whale, particularly out in this area, and we're on shore, you won't see the whale at 100 acres. So knowing where the whales are, being able to keep track of it is really important. We found some tremendously innovative ways to anchor the nets and actually create a walking platform all the way around the whole circumference from a team at Poseidon Ocean Engineering out in British Columbia. They've done some work for the aquaculture industry, and they've created an exclusive custom approach for how we're going to hang the nets. So lots of innovative stuff to get involved in and do this. But this gives you a sense of what we're actually talking about. There'll be a full-time interpretation center, like a little museum, either on site or in the nearby community. We'll have above and below water cameras so we can beam back to a marine park. Let's say a marine park, if we were to dream radically, a SeaWorld, were to agree to have some of their orcas in our sanctuary, we could beam back to the amphitheater at a marine park how whales are living in nature and make that the education rather than the tricks that they're performing today. Full-time animal care staff, as I say, full-time veterinary team. Today, if a veterinarian is specializing in whale vets, cetacean veterinary, they have to go to a marine park to do their residency. So we're looking forward to a sanctuary being the opportunity to do internship programs and the like. And as I mentioned, full-time dive team and the like to care for everything. Among the other things that we're doing, just to give you a sense of that, and we're about done with the presentation and we can all chat, I've coined the term whale aid, and we do whale aid around the world. So in 2019, there was an illegal capture of 87 whales, 97 whales, 87 belugas and 10 orca. And the Russian activists contacted us and asked for help. And I put together a little international team with my good friend Jean-Michel Cousteau. We were invited to Russia, met with the Ministry of the Environment, met with the governor of the area where the whales were being held. And over a number of weeks, we're able to craft an agreement with the Russian government that Jean-Michel, myself, and the government signed, agreeing that they would release the whales. And this was the largest release ever of captive whales. So 97 whales were released back to where they were captured. In the case of some 57 of them, the others were released more closely to where they were being held. So this work is, again, the kind of work we try to do anywhere we're asked. And frankly, it's simply because we have a team that has the expertise to do this kind of work. Similarly, we've been working with the Lummi First Nation. They're a First Nation tribe in Washington State. And under their culture, Lolita, the whale that was captured in 1970 in the Penpa Cove captures, she's been in this tank, Miami Seaquarium, for 53 years.
Jesus.
And so she is one of the, perhaps the oldest whale or the longest in captivity. And under Lummi culture, they view her as a relative. Relatives who live beneath the sea. So we're working with the tribe basically to give them the capacity to actually execute on bringing her back. So we've designed the protocols, designed the facilities that she could be in when she's returned, and they're actually trying to bring a legal matter or legal challenge to the Miami Seaquarium so their relative can be returned, and we're helping with the engineering and the physical capacity to do that. So that's basically kind of the story. I'll stop sharing screen and come back in and hope we can all chat about this. So I see lots of things in the chat. No way I can read them all. So those of you who've been writing in, how about saying your own, bring it up publicly and verbally so we can deal with it so I don't have to read.
Chuck, thank you. I think Bob Horvitz was the first questioner. Bob, are you on the screen? Oh, there you
I
are.
am, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you say hi and express what you were asking?
Hi, Chuck. Marvelous presentation, a real inspiration for tomorrow. I had two questions. One is if the orcas have so much more neocortex than we do, what do we know about their consciousness, their thought process? Is that part of your investigations that you can do in the sanctuary? And second, just let me ask unrelated question. People had thought a while ago that wildlife sanctuaries would be a way of saving wild creatures, but that didn't take into account climate change. And is there a risk that climate change will undo your efforts in locating this in Canada, and the whales might be happier moving further north?
Good question. Let me do the second one first. And the answer is we've tried to take climate change and other environmental issues into account. There's only so much you can do in that regard, but I think we're far enough north that, particularly in the area we are, that we're fairly well planned for a long-term project. But a project like this requires that the moment you take the first whale, you have to be prepared to care for it for its whole life. And these are long-lived animals. Their lifespan is similar to ours. So if we're talking about a 40-year project, and I like to say we want to go out of business. We don't want this to go on forever. So if there are no more captives, we ought to go out of business. That's not going to be in our lifetime, but hopefully in our grandchildren's lifetime. So we can't project out as far as that's going to be with respect to climate change, particularly as we'll talk about tomorrow. What we've seen in the last 5, 6, 8 years dwarfs the projections we were doing 5 years ago. So looking ahead 30, 40 years is beyond my capability. So I think that's really a great question, and one that we've done what we can, but it's certainly not enough. Coming to your first question about the thought processes of whales. We don't know very much about it, to be really honest. I mean, there's more that we don't know than we do. What we do know is when you look at the areas of the cetacean brain, which deal with communication and with emotion, that the brain matter is more convoluted, as Lori said in her part of the presentation, than that of the human brain. And we observe that kind of cultural connection among these animals in the wild. We've seen, a couple of years ago, we saw a mother whale carry her dead baby for 18 days in the Pacific Northwest. Clearly, there's no other way than to call that grief. Now, we're anthropomorphizing because we don't know what's going on, but we observe connection. And in this series, and Tori was talking about earlier, the series that's been on Disney Plus, Jim Cameron's series, looking at 4 different episodes with 4 different species of whales. That too is all about culture. And when you look at these animals in the wild, the way they stay together, the way they care for their young, it is unbelievable to not conclude that their thought patterns, their emotions are perhaps far more complex than ours and stronger than ours. In some of the talks I give, I like to say, look, we call them killer whales, but in the wild, they have never killed one another. They kill for food. So if we're comparing them to us, who's to say who is the more civilized, the whale or us? And when you look at these animals, and more we learn about so many different species, not just cetaceans, the more we learn that they have culture in all the ways we think about culture. So I'm diverted from thought pattern because I don't know a thing about thought pattern, but and I'm not the scientist in the group. I'm the guy who has managed a lot of this kind of activity. I was privileged to take the Free Willy whale back to Iceland 20 years ago, 22 years ago, when we were the first opportunity and still the only one to see whether it's possible to put a captive whale back. And what we learned is, it's really easy to capture a whale, but really difficult to put one back. And that's what informs the idea that really sanctuaries for the great majority, probably 90% or more of the whales in captivity, cannot be released. And that's what leads to the idea of a sanctuary as the next best thing.
Thank you, Chuck.
So if you're, this is Doug Perney. Can you hear me? If you're
Yes.
if the whales cannot be taken from captivity into the sanctuary, are you going to go out and capture them to bring them in?
No. What I'm saying is whales that are in captivity can't be released into the open ocean to go free and to fend for themselves. They can certainly be moved from a captive facility to a sanctuary. And that is, in fact, the concept of what we're talking about.
But if you bring a captive whale into a sanctuary, it cannot function as a wild whale would do. So its children theoretically would be the ones that would then be the beneficiary really of the full sanctuary environment. Would that be the?
No, we would not be breeding whales in captivity. Think of this, and it's not inappropriate for all of us. This is like retirement planning for whales.
Okay.
This is giving them an opportunity to have a really nice retirement. They've earned millions of dollars for those who care for them. They have entertained millions of people. We owe them something back. Let's give them as high a quality of life as we can in a sanctuary environment. But all of them, they don't have the skills to catch live fish. A beluga whale would eat 18 to 30 kilograms of fish a day. If we have 8 whales in a sanctuary, that's 1,000 pounds of fish a week. There's no way that they can capture that kind of fish, even if they knew how. But with Keiko, with Free Willy, it took us years to convince him that fish were food. He would go catch a fish when we trained him to do it, but he'd bring it back, open his mouth and say, hey, here you go. I'm bringing it back to you. He eventually learned it was food and he would capture them. But the amount of energy it would take a single whale to capture, in an orca case, 100, 125 pounds of fish a day, they need a whole community to capture fish together. And that's how they survive. It's that cultural connection of fishing as a family, not individually. So we have to still feed them. How do we feed them? Frozen fish that we thaw, human grade herring, human grade capelin, and we feed them directly. They'll come by, we throw them the fish. So is it perfect? Is it the wild? By no means. But what it does is it changes how we relate to these animals, and it changes how we educate people about them, so that in the future, we're no longer doing this. Today, China is the primary place they're opening new parks, but we're already talking with the Chinese about it. France has forbidden this. Canada has now passed a law against it. You can no longer import whales into the US. We haven't imported any new whales for some 25 years, but they have until 2 years ago been breeding them at SeaWorld. But that's changing. So as this changes, as we become, frankly, more evolved as humans and change the way we relate to some of these animals in zoos and elsewhere, this is an approach that makes some sense. Yeah.
Robin, go ahead.
Robin, yeah.
Hey, Charles. So this is just a wonderful presentation and an incredibly exciting project. I wondered whether you can mix the orcas and belugas and dolphins in the same area, in the same lagoon, or do the orcas need to be separated?
They would have to be separated. You could not combine, it wouldn't make good sense to combine species. Now, would they harm each other? I don't know. It's, there are certainly certain species of orcas. I mean, orcas are the top of the food chain in the water as we are on land. There is no animal that the orcas can't take down. Orcas in a group, a family pod of orcas will take out a blue whale, the largest whale ever to live on Earth, the largest animal ever to live on Earth. However, if I fall in the water with a group of orca, I'm not concerned. There's no examples of orca harming people in the wild. There are examples of them harming people in captivity. We used to, when we were in Iceland, we would kid with some of the divers, and we'd tell stories about, oh, don't fall in the water, you'll never get out. It was all just a joke. I mean, people are diving today. I don't recommend it. I don't think it's good for the whales, but people are swimming with orca in various parts of the world. I don't think it's good for the whales, but it's not harming the people. But in terms of mixing species, it's not a good practice, and we would not do that. So were we to have both orca and beluga, they would be completely separate sanctuaries. And what would be most interesting is how would their sounds be felt and heard and observed among them? And would that change behavior? That would be fascinating to learn more about.
Back in the 60s, my dad worked on communicating with dolphins, and one of his dolphins was borrowed by Sea Lab to bring stuff up and down.
Right.
And I guess he was free when he was, or she was free, traveling to Sea Lab, but chose to come back to the pen. I guess they make such attachments to humans that they want to be with their pals. And
yeah, we become their pod in many ways.
Yeah.
With Keiko, we had a pretty big team. What I did is we had a team of about 30 people, 15 on for 2 weeks, and then they'd be off for 2 weeks, 15 back on, just like on an oil rig or somewhere else. And Keiko clearly had people he preferred than others, and he would always seek them out. And it was, he just learned whatever. He had friends among the team, and he chose that. And we see that all the time in whales, and we do become their colleagues, their friends, their pod. And certainly it's also the case in marine parks. I mean, I may not be in favor of marine parks because of the way the animals live, but I've never met a trainer that didn't love the animals he or she is caring for, just the same way we do. But they've had a different commercial experience, and they're part of a system that doesn't particularly do as well for the animals. Rick Platt's comment, if you're seeing it in the chat, about the Detroit Zoo. The Detroit Zoo has done more to change the way we think about zoos than maybe any other zoo in the country. And it's a tremendous place. In fact, their director is now retiring, and hopefully he'll get more involved with our work in his retirement. Terrific guy. But all of this work is in many ways evolving and changing. There are certainly some experiences where zoos have been particularly effective in helping certain species that are close to extinction being recovered. That's been true of the condors with the LA Zoo program. And so all of that's been really helpful. And there's a great article in today's New York Times about this very subject, but it's few and far between. Those ideas about conservation in zoos and marine parks are not a reason to keep doing this. The data just doesn't support it. The science doesn't support it.
Charles, can I comment?
Please, yeah, there's so many people on the screen.
It's Rich Delaney. It's Rich Delaney. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of the conversation. I know of your project. It's terrific. I've been in the same line of business for a lot of my career. I run the Center for Coastal Studies.
Oh, of course. Sure,
And
I know it well.
We deal with whales. I know this is a great coincidence. Thank you, Ray, for putting us together. We deal, of course, with whales. sea, in the open ocean, not in captivity.
Know what you're
And
asking.
we're famous for a couple things. One, we've pioneered the techniques of cutting rope off entangled whales at sea. These
Yeah.
same 50-foot, 50-ton whales that get entangled in fishing net all up and down everywhere in the world. We've trained people and teams from different countries to do what we've pioneered for a lot of years. So if you want to learn more about our operation at sea, it's great, but we're in sync with everything you're trying to do, Charles. But the comment that I want to make, and the reason I'm late for this meeting is, ironically, you're talking about mixing human species and whale species in their habitat. This morning, a fellow off of where we're located, Provincetown, Massachusetts, was diving in 35 feet of water to get lobsters. He's a lobster fisherman, not with a trap, which is bad because that's line in the water that entangles whales. But he was free diving, and without his knowing, a humpback whale came down, was feeding at the same time, and actually caught this fellow in the whale's mouth and brought him 35 feet up to the surface of the ocean, shook him out like this and spit him out as if, like we were humans with a fly in our mouth. And I don't know how much damage there is. The fellow's in the hospital right now. He lived. But here's my point. Tomorrow morning, all across the national media, you will probably be seeing headlines that say, whale attacks diver.
Right.
No, it's not. That's the perception problem. Just like Jaws caused a problem with sharks. Great white sharks are feared by us and are hated by us, and we kill them largely because of that movie and the perception. So everything, Charles, you're trying to do to get our animals back in the natural habitat and have us respect it is terrific. And I can illustrate that with that little anecdote just from this morning, ironically.
But you've got a great team. I mean, the team, the people that I've known there and who have done some work with the right whales and others, just terrific work. So really impressive.
Thank you.
Jeff, did you?
Yeah, had to have the wife help me put the sound on. Remarkable story about the whales. Chuck, you were stuck in Canada where we live, but in a gorgeous area for 2 weeks, right? Quarantine?
Quarantine, and yeah, I was in a little Halifax hotel for 2 weeks in November before I could get back out to the community and the like. Yes.
Good on you for doing it. I was wondering about the numbers, the finances of this. Canadian government, Nova Scotia government, your own organization. What type of dollars are involved on an annual basis to keep something like this going? And then secondly, how do you fundraise?
Okay. Our approach is that we are not looking for any government money. So that's been part of the discussion, certainly with the province of Nova Scotia, with the government of Canada, as well as with BC and Washington previously. So all of it is philanthropic. So our lead donor was actually the Munchkin Corporation. And for your grandkids, it's a little baby products company in LA. And they got involved for a bunch of reasons early on. They used to have some whales that they did as bath toys, and they decided they would stop their bath toy whale and support the work that we're doing. So they've been a seven-figure donor for this kind of a project from the beginning. Other foundations, some of which I worked with for the work in Iceland years ago and over the years with Cousteau, and lots of individuals. Any of you who've been involved in nonprofit work, you know that the head of the organization ought to be spending 50% of their time fundraising. So while it sounds good when I show the pictures of the whales, if that's what I spend my time doing, easily half of it is fundraising. And over the years, I've actually learned that can be kind of fun too, because you do get involved with people and getting to talk about their interests. And what I like to say in these kinds of conversations is, there are no bad causes. And we live in an environment and we live in a country, particularly where the US is the most philanthropic country in the world. And I worked a lot in France with Cousteau, and it was not even remotely close to the funds we raised in the US. And so that what I'm pleased to always talk about is the fact that there are always people who are interested in a cause. So while this last year and a half, one of our or two of our most major donors shifted all of their work into health and justice, other donors come to the fore. And that's just what you have to do. And you have to be at it all the time. So this is a project that's going to cost, capital cost $15 million probably to do this. It'll cost around $2 to $2.5 million a year to operate it. So that's a lot of money. But the capital cost of $15 million is less than it would cost SeaWorld or any other place like SeaWorld. I mentioned them because they're well known to a group like us. But that's less than any new tank they would build for a few whales to be on display. So yeah, it's a lot of money, but it's appropriate to do not only for the whales that we will bring, because they're not the ones, it's a way to demonstrate that this is doable. Every building we build will be modular so that it can be replicated anywhere else in the world at less cost. All of it will be solar voltaics. We'll have some local wind power, all of the things we're trying to do so that this is something that we can replicate everywhere else as we're being asked to help them around the world. And so it's a one-off, it's a prototype, but the purpose is let's do it more.
Excellent. Well, good on you.
Charles, how do you transfer a whale from a park to the sanctuary?
Very carefully. No, it's actually, there have been, it's surprising. Whales have been being flown around. We just don't know it. I mean, if here in California, we always saw, I think everywhere was SeaWorld when we were younger, you'd see Shamu. Well, Shamu was a different whale every few years because Shamu died. And they'd fly in or bring in another whale that looks pretty similar. But basically, I'll give you the example of how we took Keiko from the Oregon Coast Aquarium to Iceland. You want to keep a whale out of the water for as short a period of time as possible. In an aircraft, they won't let you bring salt water, so you have to do it in fresh water. So you basically put them in a large fiberglass bathtub. You fill it with cold water. You keep that water circulating for the length of the flight. You cover their body, if it's going to be a long flight, with ointment to keep them moist because they're out of the salt water that they're used to. So you use A&D ointment, the baby ointment. Spread it all over their body. And basically, you submerge them in the water just so they're buoyant and they're in a sling. So you have a sling that's custom made for each whale. So their pectoral fins go out through little holes and you bring that up in a crane. In our case, we had UPS to sign off and carry him on the roadside on a barge, on a flatbed truck, onto a barge, into a plane, back to a flatbed truck, back to a barge, another crane, into the sanctuary. If it's a short enough flight with a small enough whale, you can do it with a helicopter. More often it's C-130s, unless you need extensive international travel, and then it's a large transport plane. In the case of, again, Free Willy, that was the only time the US Air Force ever leased a plane to a private group, to the nonprofit we were representing. $500,000 from the US Air Force, and they flew us from Oregon to Iceland. We air refueled twice en route because you had to take off a short runway. So you air refueled as soon as you got in the air. Then when you left US airspace, took on just enough fuel to land on a small island off the coast of Iceland. So all of that has to be obviously well planned, but it's doable and it's done all the time. Flying animals, flying whales around, costly, complicated, but not uncommon.
Thank you.
Your short film is so beautiful. I wonder if it could be used as interstitial programming on PBS, which always has, 10 minutes of nothing at the end of every hour.
If anybody knows who to talk to get it on, I'm all ears, and welcome the opportunity and trying to do it. getting a film, we've been lucky. It's been in, I think, 10 different film festivals so far, but have not been able to get it into any kind of major release. I'm doing a revision of it this next week to change out the picture of the ending picture, so it'll actually be our own sanctuary, and also to change out the animation so that it will be the animation of our own sanctuary. So we're just updating it a little bit. We're also doing a documentary film. I signed an agreement yesterday to do a documentary on the whole creation of a sanctuary. And the people who were going to produce it are hoping they'll get Netflix involved in that.
Chuck, while we have a few minutes left, it might be helpful if there are, obviously, if people can help somehow with fundraising, that would be a blessing. But you might have, as you just suggested, if anybody knows somebody at PBS, you would welcome, an introduction or an opportunity. Are there other activities that you would like to be doing that we, your former classmates and longtime friends, might be able to help you with?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for coming. I mean, for even taking a little bit of time to listen to a story like this. Obviously, it's all fun for me, but it's really nice to be able to share it with people I haven't seen in, I don't know, I don't want to talk about how many years. It's 55 years since I've seen I've seen a couple of you in between, but not much. And I think what's nice about the fact that we're doing this virtually, more of us are getting together than we might if it were only in person. And what I would hope would come out of this is not so much help with a project like this, but let's stay in touch. We're all doing different things, and we're all in different aspects of our lives for various reasons. But the fact that we're getting together is a huge opportunity to stay connected. And so that's what I would say is certainly the foremost of interest to me. Anything going on with whales where we can help with release opportunities, with entanglement issues, as we heard talked about earlier. A number of the folks on my team have done all of that kind of work. They're real specialists. I'm not, I'm a generalist. And I've been privileged enough to do enough work in the ocean over the years that I've learned a few things about it. But any of the work that we're doing, the work in Russia a few years ago, the work with the First Nations now, lately, there's a big effort to move the 4 orca, as I mentioned earlier, out of Marineland Antibes. So I'm working with the French activists on that. And wherever these activities take place, wherever there are problems, wherever there's legislation that's being considered about cetaceans, certainly myself and the group I work with, the folks I have, are really interested in assisting in any of that wherever we can. So we're always open to that. But more importantly, as I say, let's stay in touch. This is interesting stuff. It's fun stuff. There are a lot of questions about it. Someone asked, how long does a whale live? Orcas have been known to live into their 80s, particularly females. Males more likely into their 60s. Belugas into their 50s. They're long-lived, much less than some of the sharks and some of the other animals that we're now seeing. But they are, in many ways, as I said earlier, the more we learn about them, the more we learn about their culture and the fact that they have culture. And that's something growing up we didn't know. One quick little story as we end. When I was first working with Cousteau, one of the early things we did was we were doing some filming down in Australia. And my job was to go ahead of the team, go down and figure out what we would do on filming, who we could partner with, could we find local money, local TV programs to work with us and the like, the networks. I was making a trip to Australia for a week, a month for like 6 months. Got to the Gold Coast and there was a marine park. So I went into the marine park and I introduced myself and they said, well, you're the Cousteau guy, come on behind the scenes. We went down into the tank before the show. They showed me the tricks. I put my feet together like this, blew a whistle, whale comes up underneath me, a pseudo orca, throws me up in the air. Wow, this is just remarkable stuff. Then they said, okay, now you can basically water ski on the backs of 2 of them across the tank. I hopped on and I went across the tank on them. And, this was really fun. After that, I got up in the amphitheater and I watched the show and I said, holy shit, what have I just done? I'm the show guy here in Australia on my own, and I'm playing with a bunch of whales in a tank. And that experience stuck with me forever because it was such a dichotomy to, in a sense, have the rush and the fun of jumping in the water with them without thinking about any of it. And then being able to sit back and say, did I really just do something that Jacques Cousteau would have approved of? Or did I just screw up my whole career? And so, it's that kind of experience that leads to things we never expect. I didn't expect to be doing this stuff today. I didn't expect to have the chance to take Keiko, Free Willy, and manage that project for 4 years in Iceland and live basically in Iceland for 4 years. My wife would come over and get to ride the helicopter with me to search for wild whales to reintroduce Keiko to. But they're all just experiences that happen. And I think a lot of you have had that same experience. What we set out to do isn't at all what we ended up doing. And each step along the way opens another door. So this is another door that's open, and it's open to all of you in any ways that you think it'd be fun to be involved.
That's just great.
Some say that the complicated brains are mainly for social connections, that society is so complicated. And as Charles mentioned, maybe we should all stay a little more connected and emulate the whales.
Good stuff.
Amen. It'd be great if we could.
All
Well,
right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Charles.
Thanks a lot. Nice to see all of you.
Yep.
See you again as the day goes on.
Thank you,
Thank
Charles.
you so much, Charles.
Thanks, Charles.
Thank you.
Hey, if we all applaud, would it sound like a crowd? Let's see.